You're listening to Quantum Harry the podcast version of the book Quantum Harry, A Unified Theory of the Potterverse by B.L. Purdom. Episode 2, This Old Man. In the Kids Table, Episode 1 of Quantum Harry the podcast, I talked about the overarching theme that runs throughout the 7-book Harry Potter series by JK Rowling. If you missed it, stop listening to Episode 2 now and go back to Episode 1. The book Quantum Harry, A Unified Theory of the Potterverse is divided into 3 sections of 7 chapters each. In Part 1, I examine Rowling's archetypes, her game pieces. A particular archetype rules each of the 7 books in the Harry Potter series, and there's a character who best embodies the ruling archetype in each book. Though in every case, there are multiple characters who embody the ruling archetype. The reason that it's illuminating to focus on the ruling archetype for each book and the character who best embodies it is that Harry steps into that character's shoes or otherwise serves as a surrogate for that character sometime during each book, usually during the climax. Even though I'll be focusing on the ruling archetype for each book, when I'm examining the characters who embody each archetype, I'll be drawing on examples from across all 7 books in the series, assuming that the character occurs in more than one book, and not just from the book under discussion. The title of Part 1 of Quantum Harry is The Game Pieces, Archetypes in the Harry Potter Books. Part 2's title is All's Fair in War and Quidditch, an in-depth examination of how Rowling morphs her games into battles and gives battles game-like qualities, plus how toys and game pieces become weapons, and how fairy tales and the celebration of a holiday when adults get to behave like kids all form a running thread in the series, childhood and the things connected to childhood. Part 3 is entitled Harry and Tarot, Harry Plays the Ultimate Game. In this section I examine the symbols of the Tarot Major Arcana, cards that were originally used to play games. In each of the 7 chapters in this part of the book, I examine how the title and symbols traditionally associated with each card illuminate the link in each of the 7 Harry Potter books between the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher for that book, one of the obstacles to the Philosopher's Stone that Harry encountered way back in the first book, and the Horcrux that aligns with each book. With that said, it's time to move forward with the podcast version of Part 1, Chapter 1 of Quantum Harry, A Unified Theory of the Potterverse, now known as Quantum Harry the Podcast, Episode 2, This Old Man. So, why begin with archetypes? What does that have to do with toys, fairy tales, and games? Well, for some time now, some of the most popular games around have been role-playing games, or RPGs. Dungeons & Dragons is probably the best known. Many video games now also require players to choose a character they will be representing before they play, and your choice directly impacts on how you play the game. The actions of RPG characters are circumscribed by their abilities and limitations. Something interesting has happened over thousands of years of individual and collective human storytelling. The stories we've created often have characters that fall into time-honored archetypes. In this and the next 5 episodes, I'll examine 6 major archetypes first. The order in which these game pieces, the archetypes, are discussed is linked to which one rules each of the first 6 Harry Potter books. The 7th archetype is one that any of the others may also be, the liminal being. That's Liminal. Archetypes have a way of seeping into stories. They figure in RPGs, in classic fairy tales, in mythology, and in Harry Potter. TVTropes.com is dedicated to the idea that there are no new stories or characters. Almost any so-called new tale can be deconstructed. Its parts can be tagged as this trope or that classic plot twist. Popular wisdom says newer is better. Yet JK Rowling created her 7-book epic around classic archetypes that have permeated human stories for thousands of years, and she became the best-selling author of all time by doing so. Here's a brief quote from Chapter 16 of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. There was a loud, sizzling sound, and both twins were hurled out of the golden circle as though they had been thrown by an invisible shot-putter. They landed painfully, 10 feet away on the cold stone floor, and, to add insult to injury, there was a loud popping noise, and both of them sprouted identical long white beards. The first 6 archetypes break down into 3 male and 3 female, and each one aligns with part of a human lifespan: youth, middle age, and old age. But don't assume that Rowling is being completely binary about gender just because these archetypes can be seen in the books. Sometimes a male character embodies a female archetype, and vice versa. Plus, we have the dragon Norbert being called Norberta by the end of the series. If you've read any mythology, you're probably familiar with the archetypes of the maiden, mother, and crone. On the male side, the youth is often the hero in myths and folktales, though many fairy tales have maidens for heroes, which is why I feel strongly that hero is a story role and not an archetype. The oldest male archetype is the wise old man, and in the middle we still have the parental figure, the father. It's hardly earth-shattering to suggest that Harry is an archetypal youth, and it's clear that Dumbledore is both nominally and archetypally a wise old man, but it may not be as clear which other characters are wise old men, and why. JK Rowling makes extensive use of doppelgangers in the Harry Potter books, and Albus Dumbledore is one of Ron Weasley's. They have many things in common and often play similar roles in Harry's life. From the start, Ron guides Harry into the wizarding world. He offers folk wisdom, which is usually the role of an older member of the community, the wise old man. In the first book, when Harry is on the Hogwarts Express with Ron, Dumbledore is invoked when Harry finds his famous wizard card in a chocolate frog package. In Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, there's a passage about this that is perfect to apply to the Harry Potter series. Campbell writes about, quote, "the wise old man of the myths and fairy tales whose words assist the hero through the trials and terrors of the weird adventures. He is the one who appears and points to the magic shining sword that will kill the dragon terror, applies healing balm to the almost fatal wounds, and finally dismisses the conqueror back into the world." Ron and Dumbledore fit this description even down to the sword of Gryffindor. In the second book, Fawkes the Phoenix, Dumbledore's avatar, or representative, appears in Dumbledore's place in the Chamber of Secrets, bringing the sorting hat with the sword of Gryffindor, which Harry uses to kill the dragon terror, the basilisk. Fawkes also uses a healing balm, his phoenix tears, to heal Harry when he's pierced by a basilisk fang. Ron appears to Harry in the 7th book after being back home for a while. He pulls the magic shining sword that Campbell writes about from the pond in the forest. He saves Harry's life by cutting the chain strangling him, which is the healing balm in this case, and with the sword he kills the dragon terror, the Horcrux made from Slytherin's locket. In this scene, Ron takes on the role of a holy man. He's John the Baptist to Harry's Christ figure, pulling Harry from the water to begin a new life, which is what baptism signifies. This makes Ron a particular type of wise old man, the godfather. Dumbledore is also this type of wise old man, but even more so. He's a god figure, or godfather of godfathers. Campbell also writes, "The helpful crone and fairy godmother is a familiar feature of European fairy lore, but JK Rowling has gone the fairy godfather route, and Ron and Dumbledore aren't the only ones embodying this subset of the wise old man archetype." Another wise old man Harry encounters in the 1st, 4th, and 7th books is Mr. Ollivander, the wand maker, who tells Harry that his wand has a feather from the same phoenix that gave a feather to Voldemort's wand, and of course, that phoenix is Fawkes, Dumbledore's avatar. Like Ron, Ollivander tells Harry lore of the new world he's entered, but rather than pointing him to a sword, he gives him another type of weapon or tool, his wand. The next time Ollivander appears is in Goblet of Fire, for the weighing of the wands. He tests the Triwizard Champion's wands, and when he does, we learn something revealing about each owner. Fleur Delacour's grandmother, who was a Vila, contributed a hair to her wand, which Ollivander calls unstable, though he uses it to conjure flowers. Fleur is, of course, the French word for flower. With Victor Crumb's thick, inflexible dragon heartstring wand, Ollivander conjures birds. Victor's beaky nose makes him resemble a bird, and his flying prowess also makes him bird-like. Victor's wand core is another connection to flight, since some dragons can fly, but dragons are also a type of snake, so this links Victor to Slytherin, which is the table in the Great Hall where Victor and the other Durmstrang students sit while they're at Hogwarts. Cedric Diggory has a unicorn hair for a core, a symbol of purity and virtue. With his wand, Ollivander conjures silvery smoke rings, which Cedric will resemble before the end of the book, when he emerges from Voldemort's wand as a smoky shadow. Harry's wand test result is one of many links to his role as a Christ figure. The first miracle Jesus performed was turning water into wine, and Ollivander tests Harry's wand by conjuring a fountain of wine. Ollivander is circumspect about revealing too much information, so he doesn't tell anyone that Harry's and Voldemort's wands have anything in common. In the 7th book, Ollivander imparts more lore to Harry about wands choosing wizards, this time in regard to a wand that's been won or taken by force, which makes Harry suspect that he is master of the Elder Wand. And fortunately, he's not wrong. There's a pair in the younger generation who, like Ron, belie their age and also represent the wise old man archetype. Fred and George Weasley, who featured in the quote I read earlier, when they sprouted long white beards, like old men, after trying to age themselves up to enter the Triwizard Tournament. They have the highly appropriate birthday of April Fool's Day, and they echo Dumbledore's high spirits and puckishness. Like Ollivander, they are purveyors of magical goods to all comers, regardless of who will use them and how. They don't do any background checks at their shop in Diagon Alley. Like Dumbledore, who doesn't refuse a magical education to the children of Slytherins or students sorted into Slytherin on principle, and like Ollivander, who doesn't just sell wands to people he thinks are virtuous, they don't regard magical knowledge or power to be good or evil. The products in their shop, like a Hogwarts education or an Ollivander's wand, are morally neutral, and how they're used or abused is another story. Also like Dumbledore, Ron, and Ollivander, the twins reveal important lore and wisdom to Harry, especially when they gave him the Marauders map. Ollivander makes real wands, while Fred and George create trick wands, and like Dumbledore, they're also fond of sweets, though theirs are borderline dangerous. When Dumbledore departs the castle during Order of the Phoenix, it's appropriate that the twins take over the guerrilla war. They are Dumbledore's kindred spirits and lieutenants in the fight against Umbridge. Sirius Black is almost like a father to Harry and becomes very important to him, so much so that Voldemort uses the image of Sirius in danger to get Harry to go to the Ministry in Order of the Phoenix. As Harry's godfather, so he's literally the godfather version of the wise old man, he's supposed to take James's place in his life, but he's not an archetypal father. In the 4th and 5th books, Sirius continues the wise old man tradition of giving Harry lore and wisdom from his world. This is always the job of an archetypal wise old man. Victor Krum is another godfather version of the wise old man, and shares many similarities with Sirius and Dumbledore. They're all infamous. Before Harry meets Victor, he sees scowling posters of him at the Quidditch World Cup. He sees images of Sirius, the wanted criminal, on the Muggle news. And he sees Dumbledore's famous wizard card before meeting him. Their reputations precede them. Sirius grew up in a dark arts-obsessed family. Victor's school teaches dark arts, though he isn't swayed by this, just like Sirius isn't swayed by his family. Victor is incensed that Mr. Lovegood, another wise old man, wears Grindelwald's mark at Bill and Fleur's wedding, since he says it was a symbol for dark wizards to rally around at Durmstrang. Luna's father, like Quirrell, is a failed wise old man. He shares the lore of the Deathly Hallows with Harry, but he betrays him in an attempt to protect Luna. Sirius and Victor thumbed their noses at the dark arts-friendly environments in which they spent their formative years, and Dumbledore defeated Grindelwald after they shared a common philosophy and goal for wizard kind. Yet Victor is still used by a dark wizard to bring Harry to a confrontation. This happens when Barty Crouch Jr., still disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, puts Imperius on Victor in the maze during the last task of the tournament, in order to make Victor put Cruciatus on Cedric in turn, with the intention of helping Harry win the tournament. Sirius's and Victor's allegiances don't prevent their being used by the enemy, and in Sirius's case, it leads directly to his being used to get Harry to the Ministry in Order of the Phoenix, while Dumbledore makes the mistake of thinking that Harry should learn occlumency to shut Voldemort out of his mind, even though Voldemort experiencing Harry's deep love for Sirius turns out to be a very effective, if unintentional, weapon against him. We've looked now at a few characters who embody the wise old man, the Rowling archetype for the first book. So it might not be surprising that the character who best embodies this archetype in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is Albus Dumbledore. In each book, Harry steps into the shoes of, or in some way trades places with, the character best embodying the ruling archetype for the book, and this starts with Dumbledore. After getting past 6 of the 7 obstacles to the Philosopher's Stone, Harry is in the chamber with Quirrell, Voldemort, and the Mirror of Erised, the stone's last defense. Harry here is Dumbledore's surrogate, Dumbledore being the only one Voldemort ever feared. Quirrell, who is Voldemort's surrogate, acting on his behalf, learns that he also has a reason to fear Harry. When he puts his hands on him, he experiences a burning that eventually kills him. Dumbledore trusts Harry to protect the stone in his place. This might seem like a lot to lay on an 11-year-old, but he knows that Harry's presence in the castle is the next best thing to being there himself. This is mirrored at the end of the 7th book, in Deathly Hallows, by Harry again being Dumbledore's surrogate as Master of the Elder Wand, which Dumbledore won from Grindelwald. Dumbledore's defeat of Grindelwald, but not the bit about becoming master of his wand, is one of the pieces of information Harry reads on Dumbledore's famous wizard card near the beginning of the 1st book, and this card is acquired through a sweet, the chocolate frog. The card also happens to mention a game Dumbledore enjoys, tenpins, a type of bowling. So this card combines games, sweets, and fairy tales, since Harry might have previously considered alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone to be as plausible as a fairy tale. In the 1st book, Quirrell, the flip side to Dumbledore, is a grotesquely warped wise old man, even though he's not presented as elderly. He tries to acquire the Philosopher's Stone from Dumbledore, who doesn't want to use it himself. Quirrell wants it for Voldemort. As Harry's professor, he should be imparting wisdom and magical lore to Harry, but he's been corrupted by Voldemort, so he fails Harry, Dumbledore, and eventually Voldemort too. It isn't revealed in the 1st book, but Harry is a Horcrux, a vessel containing a fragment of Voldemort's soul. He's one of the anchors keeping Voldemort alive, though just barely in the 1st book. Quirrell also serves as a living vessel for the piece of Voldemort's soul that remained after the killing curse rebounded on him and destroyed his body on the night he killed Harry's parents. Joseph Campbell describes this type of indestructibility, quote, "This folk idea of the spiritual double, an external soul not afflicted by the losses and injuries of the present body, but existing safely in some place removed." It's unclear whether Quirrell on his own, or Voldemort himself through Quirrell, says, "There is no good or evil, there's only power, and those too weak to seek it." JK Rowling puts this statement in the mouth of a villain, whether Quirrell or Voldemort, take your pick, and she seems to consider love to be of utmost importance. Love plays a large part in any discussion of power. It's the most important power in Rowling's books, and it's a uniting power rather than a divisive power. Quirrell seems both afraid of the power he wields as host to Voldemort and to glory in it. Harry, not knowing that some of his power comes from the piece of Voldemort in him, doesn't react the way young Tom Riddle does when he starts to feel his power over other children. Harry enjoys the snake escaping the zoo, but doesn't mean to harm anyone, and he isn't tempted by the promise of greatness through Slytherin when he's being sorted. Potential power isn't the temptation for Harry that it is for Tom Riddle, Quirrell, or even Dumbledore in both his youth and his old age. This makes Harry that epitome of someone Quirrell and/or Voldemort labels too weak to seek power, but Harry's strength lies in resisting the temptation of power. He triumphs, to use game theory terminology, through seeking an equilibrium, sharing power, not attempting to consolidate power. The Ministry asked Dumbledore to be the Minister for Magic many times, and Cornelius Fudge seeks his counsel regularly. But carefully not seeking and even avoiding power for himself is something Dumbledore the Wise Old Man has learned to do over many years, and it's clear that he's not in the least bit weak because he doesn't reach for this power. He fears he may be weak if he succumbs to the temptation of power, so he does everything he can to avoid putting himself in such a position, which takes enormous strength. Harry, on the other hand, already understands this instinctively as an 11-year-old, and this inner core of strength serves him well when he steps into his headmaster's shoes to protect the Philosopher's Stone, and he succeeds in thwarting Voldemort's plans for the 2nd time in his life. You've been listening to Quantum Harry the Podcast, a podcast version of the book Quantum Harry, A Unified Theory of the Potterverse by B.L. Purdom. All music heard on Quantum Harry is composed and performed by B.L. Purdom. Next time on Quantum Harry the Podcast, Episode 3, Iron Maiden, an examination of the archetype of the maiden in the Harry Potter series. I hope you'll join me.